a second when you got back.
Okay, no worries. You're good.
Okie dokie. Are we ready?
Yep.
So this is... Alright, so this is the monthly update for Graphite. If you're just tuning in for the first time, very quick overview. Basically, Graphite is aiming to be a 2D graphics editor that covers the use cases of Photoshop and GIMP, as well as the use cases of Illustrator and Inkscape. And it combines that with a procedural, non-destructive approach. So sort of like Houdini or Nuke or Blender geometry nodes, or any kind of node-based shader editor, except more in the context of actual graphics creation rather than shaders or modeling. Here's a mock-up of the UI. So we're aiming to make something that's relatively traditional. You've got your tools on the left, you've got your tabs at the top, you've got your layer panel, you've got your properties panel. But then the not traditional part is that we are integrating a node graph with it. And you will notice that there's a bijection between the nodes here and the layers here. So we've designed specifically in a way that allows you to view either the normal, relatively similar to the usual layer tree, or you can view it in the form of a directed acyclic graph, because a tree and a graph are somewhat interchangeable. So with that quick overview out of the way, let's cover some progress from this past month. So first of all, we attended GDC, the Game Developers Conference, to talk about Graphite as an attendee to other attendees. Both myself as well as our community member Oliver, we were both there and had a good time talking to people about Graphite. Especially meeting some good artists and seeing what they're interested in. So that was fun. And we also have updated the website for Graphite, so I can show that off right now. So now we have some new artwork here. I went and created this over the past few days. Finally spent some real time actually using Graphite for real artwork. And we also have this that I showed earlier. And now we've got some updated text, we've got a new video. This is something I've shown in the past, but feel free to watch that on your own time. We've got some new icons. And we also have an updated features page, which includes some of this information, as well as a new roadmap. So if you're interested in seeing specifically where we are in the roadmap for Graphite, we've got all the content from the first year of development condensed into one bullet point, and then this past year of development has also been condensed into one bullet point. And now here is the remaining things we have to complete before we complete Alpha Milestone 1 and move on to Alpha Milestone 2. And then we'll also eventually get to Alpha Milestone 3, and then eventually Beta, and eventually 1.0 release, and then everything goes on beyond 1.0. So that is an update to the website. Feel free to check it out at graphite.rs. Then the past very big feature from the past month has been the vector nodes refactor /port /migration. Basically what this means is that we've ported all the shape data and the styling into the node graph, because previously it was its own layer type before we adopted the node graph system. But now if we actually click on these, you will see each of these vector shapes we have a path generator. So this is the node that stores your path data. So if you use the pen tool and you move things around, it will store your changes back into this node. And in the future, we'll be able to visualize those changes in the form of a spreadsheet where each row is its own node, and each column is either like the anchor or the handles and those different positions. We now also have another node which it feeds into, which is the transform, and this basically gives it the ability to be placed somewhere in the canvas. So in this case, we have it placed at 454, 413 in the canvas. And it's not rotated, but we could rotate it, for example. Or we could scale it. Then we pass it into the fill, and this is where we could set the fill. And right now we're using a gradient fill, and we're using a linear gradient from this color to this color. We could also just hit the invert button, for example, and swap it. Then we also have a stroke node, so the data feeds through the stroke node and it sets the stroke. And you can see that we have this stroke set. I could, for example, increase that to 20, and it would, of course, increase. And then finally we have it feed into the output node, and that's how it actually gets sent and rendered into the canvas. So for each of these different layers, we have all of the different shapes. And for example, this one, here's one with a radial gradient. So we have almost solid color the entire way, except from 77 to 100%, we end up having this color turn a little bit brighter. So you can see it around the radial gradient going from the center to the outskirts. That's where it changes color. And yes, that was a very, very big refactor because it required essentially going through every single system that uses vector data, and now it stores it in more of a modular data form rather than being just a separate node type or a separate layer type that had nothing to do with the node graph. So now there's only one layer type left that we have to convert over and port to the node system, and that will be the text tool. So, hello. This is its own layer type, you can see, because it has its own icon, but everything else now has the layer icon, indicating that it's a layer part of the node graph. And essentially every layer is interchangeable, you just have something, and whatever that something is ends up going to an output node, and then that gets rendered into the layer. And we just have this text tool next that is going to be ported in the next month, and that means that we just have folders and layers. And then the final step after that is porting both folders and layers into a single node graph. So each layer is no longer a separate, well, layer in this layer panel. It is instead part of one node graph. And then folders also encapsulate layers, and they are also part of the same single node graph. So your entire document will be one node graph, and at that point, we will then have a new layer panel which represents the tree format of the node graph as shown in the mockup earlier. Shown in this mockup here. So that's how we will end up displaying them, and you'll still see them in the layer tree here, but it's going to look a little different. So that has been the major progress for the month, and additionally we've done some various bug fixes. We were aiming to polish things up a bit, so that was a major focus, well, a side focus besides the vector nodes for this past month. So with that said, feel free to check it out. You can go to editor.graphite.rs and play with it right now. If you join our Discord, you can also you can find this file here. Just go to the Art Showcase channel and you can download the Graphite file and then open it up in Graphite yourself and play with it. So go ahead and take a look at our Discord, grab that file, and open it up in editor.graphite.rs. And also we have some beginner-friendly issues on GitHub, so I'm just going to quickly show that. We do have, if you go to the Issues tab and then go to Approachable Mini Starter Tasks for new contributors, pick any of these ones from the bullet points here, and these should all be relatively approachable. And also feel free to send us a message, and we'd also be very happy to help out with telling you where to get started. And then there is also on this page here, how to contribute. We have an entire introduction guide for contributing, just sort of a how to install the project, how to start understanding a little bit of the code, and how to debug things. So feel free to check that out and submit some pull requests for some of the different issues we have. So yeah, with that said, I'll see you next month.
All right, so very cool kind of seeing I think just seeing different art pieces that you create are pretty cool because it kind of gives a little bit of a view into how I guess how your mind sees being able to use Graphite at the current state, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, so it definitely is a competent vector editor at this point, and now we're just going into the very interesting territory of making it also become a raster editor slowly, little piece by piece, picking out specific things like the AI image generation with stable diffusion. That's a very because we can sort of just integrate an external technology, that's something where it's a low-hanging fruit, actually, to integrate that innovative technology. But things like the brush tool, which, by the way, we have very, very close to done now. I didn't show it off because it's not merged, but we do have a brush tool, which just has to be having a few small bug fixes added in the next couple days and then merged.
Was this the brush tool that we were talking about several meetups ago with all the unique procedural ways of setting it up?
Yeah, so it's procedural. Basically, the way that it works is it records your mouse movement, and each of those points that are part of the mouse movement recording end up being rasterized into a brush. And if you change the color, or you change the radius, or you change any of the other properties, it will re-rasterize that brush, and you have a new layer containing the new data.
Okay, interesting. So I guess like the separation between that and other manners is that you with something like Illustrator, you do brushes on a layer, but it wouldn't necessarily like it would just draw that in. It wouldn't store the mouse information for later.
Yeah, exactly. Because it normally in another editor, in traditional raster editors, it would store it by. It would store the basically the pixels that you filled as soon as you draw them. So here I can go ahead and draw something, and you'll see temporarily we're going to see just a stroke like that, but then it gets rasterized like this as soon as you let go. That's for performance reasons. At the moment, we don't have the ability to rasterize it in real time because we don't have GPU execution, so everything is running on the CPU. But now I can also turn up the hardness, for example, and we end up with this. So it's a little splotchy. That's just because the mouse movement in between frames, and I was moving my mouse quickly. But we can definitely do some improvements going forward, which will resample points in between and that kind of thing. And of course, we can change the color, increase the size after the fact, so it renders it at a higher size. And of course, we can turn down the opacity. The opacity, and that specifically is the opacity of each individual stroke, so that they don't end up clumping together. Like in this case, they kind of clump together, and you're mostly seeing the same color in the inner portion, and then around the outer portion, you're seeing the fall off. So yeah, that is the brush tool.
Okay, awesome.
That will be merged very soon.
One question from chat here. Is it possible to have multiple layers with the same node graph, like prefabs?
Layers with the same node graph. That will be part of when we have replaced all the separate layers with one major node graph, or one single node graph that defines the document, and each individual layer will then be part of the same node graph. But we can't do that at the moment because right now each node graph a layer is defined as being a node graph, and we need to move towards a document as being defined as a single node graph with layers inside.
So maybe I guess like the way I would think about it is like if you have this is very much like how Godot works, where you have scenes that you can like duplicate very easily, and then wherever you're using them, you can just add like another reference to that same scene, and then you change that scene, you're good to go. And like it just like applies across everywhere that references it. And so in the same way, like if you have like some upper level node, could I reference that from multiple different places in the node graph and have sort of just like an instance of it?
In the future, you should be able to, but again, at the moment, every layer is defined as containing its own node graph. So of course you can duplicate a layer, but then any changes you make to the one are not going to propagate to the other.
And just out of curiosity, is that pattern used very often at all? Like, or like where you would want to have multiple things reference the same layer?
I don't know.
Yeah, I imagine like potentially adjustment layers, or I'm thinking maybe like in games, like what type of stuff would you have in a layer, or I guess in a node graph that you would just want to have all over the place? And
I think once you get into procedural things, which will be upcoming, you have the ability, for example, to take a layer, the content from a layer, and stamp it in a bunch of places. So you might say, replicate this shape 100 times across, scattered across your artwork, or scattered across the interior of a shape, or something like that. But that's all the procedural content that, of course, will be coming relatively soon, but not quite yet.
Okay, cool. Yeah, okay, and so like the follow-up is about that as well, so that you can edit the graph and changes apply to all layers. Yeah, okay. Yeah, and just out of curiosity as well, so with GDC, so you mentioned that like some people were able to you're like chatting with some people about Graphite and stuff like that. What I'm quite curious about is, I mean, I viewed this project very much from the Rust perspective. I'm like, oh yeah, there's like a lot of cool stuff in the stack. It's cool seeing the progress and everything. But what do artists feel about it? Like, what are some what's some feedback that you've gotten from people who'd use it?
Yeah, they seem to be pretty interested in the concept of having a free open source editor. Of course, I wasn't talking to artists specifically about the concept of it being Rust-based, because that's probably a language they may have never even heard of. But basically, they were interested in the idea of it being node-based, and they seem to have liked the UI. So that is validating that people seem to see the potential, even though, of course, it was always relatively short conversations without being able to always go into as much depth as the rabbit hole goes for the Graphite project.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I I don't know too much about GDC this year. Like I guess you went as just like an attendee, right?
Yeah, to the expo only.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Was there anything else there that you saw that was like pretty nifty? Any like interesting things?
There was definitely the very beginnings of the AI revolution showing up.
Yeah.
You could see a number of companies that were showing little mock-ups. I think they were probably just mock-ups of using prompts to type out saying, like, fill this terrain with grass and then add houses and then add vehicles and things like that. They were probably mock-ups though, because this is just the first few months since large language models have become accessible in an API form. But I'm fairly sure that next year that will be the entire rage of the show.
Yeah.
So we're just seeing the very previews of it, and I'm glad in our case we're actually, at least with the generative AI, pretty early on the curve and taking advantage of that while it's still fresh.
Yeah, well, and especially just like in the way that it's being used in Graphite. Like, I mean, the ability to generate images is not very novel. The ability to kind of like use it as a tool to smooth over images and like make small changes. And I mean, as I was playing with it, there was just like I felt like there was a ton of potential for stuff that I hadn't done before. And so
yeah, just like the ability to paint with a brush was not novel, but the ability to use a digital brush as part of a tool, a larger tool that does digital art, was of course quite novel when digital photo editing became a thing.
Yeah, exactly. All right, yeah. Well, it's great seeing the Graphite updates as always. So, thank you very much again.
Yeah, thank you. See you next month.
Cheers.